You saw the thumbnail of this video, of these two legendary samurai literally wielding the same sword with the same Ryuma trailing lore. Of these absolute machines, I think Oden would clearly best Zoro. And for most people who have read the story of One Piece closely, they probably do too. But why exactly do I favor one Kaido-cutting king over the other? And why so boldly as to tell you who wins right out the gate? And that, dear viewer, is because so many people are wrong about what the legend that is Kozuki Oden, despite Oda himself practically beating us over the head with his lore and scaling, from the longest backstory in the series, and even more so from his parallels to modern day events and characters. So for this video, I just want you and the whole Zoro mob to kick back, relax, and get a nice cold drink, and let me tell you why Oden would definitely win. And from as early as chapter 959, or even before that, Kozuki Oden is portrayed to be a looming shadow over the land of Wano. His legacy is one that is very different from many other characters. Beat the people who talk about his accolades, his backstory spanning a gargantuan 13 chapters, or even just the way in which his narrative unfolds. Oden is a man meant to fulfill many roles within the context of the story of One Piece. And for this video, the most important of those is his relationship with Kaido. Because among all the characters who Oden's story is intertwined with, none are more significant and explored than that of Kaido. And as you see, while Oden's execution towards the end of his flashback chapters was considered to be the demoralizing final blow for an era of prosperity in the land of Wano, leaving many characters to only wish and dream that Kozuki Oden could return once more, for Kaido this wasn't so simple. As Oden, like many other exceptional flashback characters, went out in a way that meant his goals were destined to succeed. Not for his sake, but to serve as a piece of motivation for the modern cast and to mirror why the villain's dreams will never come true. So to fulfill that role, characters often need highly specific goals and traits to parallel the antagonist, most of which will usually spell their end, be it Bellemere having unending loyalty whereas Arlong had none, Corazon having a true heart of gold whereas Dofi had none, or even someone like Kuina having strength and discipline where Zoro had none. But in the case of Kaido and his mirror, the reason why Oden is revered by Kaido to the point of looking for the spirit of Oden in everyone isn't just because of his conviction, but because he was strong. Oden's ability to potentially defeat Kaido and his status as one of the few people who could not just scar but knock him down is 100% essential to his story making sense. As Kaido regrets the unfair loss Kozuki Oden faced at his hands, even 20 years later. Not just because Oden had true conviction, but because of Kaido's dream. To find someone truly capable of literally slaying the king of all beasts. And from the moment he was deprived of that fight with Oden, Kaido seemed to be completely obsessed with going out in a way just like him. And while this does lead to many interesting parallels from Kaido and Yamato drawing upon different inspirations from Oden, based on their perspectives, one wanting to live like him and one wanting to die like him, or even with how Kaido thought that being deprived of fair victory against Oden or Luffy was an even worse fate than him losing to them. But that's not really the point of this video. This entire narrative section is all to say that Kozuki Oden wasn't just a ghost that was chasing after Kaido in name alone, because the story itself supports the idea that Oden's almost mythological feats of strength should be taken in the context of borderline surpassing a young Kaido, even from the get-go. Because, from the beginning of the raid, almost to the very end, Kaido is comparing everyone to the peak that is Oden, not just in willpower, but in strength, as Kaido puts Oden among his top 5 of all time, who could have actually posed a threat to his well-being. And rather than trying to twist this or misinterpret it into some sort of word puzzle, when Luffy arrives on the roof, Kaido asks how high his potential will go, as a direct measure of strength. Not only does the story back this up as strength is what matters to Kaido, not just pointless conviction as he doesn't respect weak people, but it's also not contradicted by anything in the series as Kaido says he's the strongest in the world, despite Shanks still being alive. So just because they're on his top 5 list doesn't mean they can beat him necessarily, which debunks the notion that Oden has to be stronger than Kaido, or Roger, or anyone else on the list for it to make sense. So now, with all that information in mind of Oden being considered a top 5 threat mirroring Snake Man G4 Conqueror's coding Luffy, and just his general legacy looming over Wano as if he was some sort of potential trump card, when we move on now into the actual power scaling section, hopefully my thoughts on Zoro will be more clear. Since to avoid beating around the bush, Zoro's lore, feats, and legacy all actively contradict the notion that he has currently surpassed Oden. In terms of Zoro's lore and story, his entire adventure ever since the day we met him has been to become the greatest, not to already be the greatest. Everything about Zoro's narrative is to show growth, constantly and consistently through every arc. That's why we see Zoro go from picking up enma as an unwieldy weapon of mass destruction, to him ending the arc with it under his command as the King of Hell. And obviously no one would doubt Zoro's growth throughout the time of the Wano arc. However, it's clear for anyone who reads or watches the story with their brains turned on, that the story Oda intended for Zoro and Wano was not for him to surpass Oden yet. Be it Zoro's Dragon Blaze causing Kaido to have Oden flashbacks, Zoro being able to stand toe-to-toe against Conquest of the Sea, or even his infamous Dead Man's Game allowing him to scar Kaido for the first time since Oden, it's very clear that Zoro is supposed to have some sort of parallel to Oden's strength through Kaido's story. But if you pay even the slightest bit of attention to the nuances presented in the arc, it's clear that Oda still intends for Oden to be a different milestone that Zoro will surpass. Be it Zoro saying he has no idea how Oden could wield enma, to the Dragon Blaze flashbacks being revealed to have been caused by enma being there, not Zoro, and even Zoro's strongest attack intentionally being stated not to knock down Kaido, which Oden obviously did, it's clear that Kaido did not have the same fear for Zoro that he held for Oden, with the Emperor himself even going as far as to say that Zoro should just be happy he could scar him, whereas he blatantly makes it clear that he thinks Oden could still potentially defeat him in a 1v1. And honestly, it really does make sense when we just look at the power scaling and feats. Oden, even 20 years after his death, is still constantly implied not to have been power cliffs, still entirely capable of scarring a prime Kaido. With other characters shown to surpass or rival Zoro like Yamato, still hasn't lived up to the legacy of Kozuki Oden, being directly inferior to him in the eyes of Kaido. Or even the likes of Eustace Kid, who got one tap by a divine departure from Shanks, whereas Oden casually got up from the same attack delivered by a stronger character. By comparison, all of Zoro's best feats are just watered down versions of Oden's better ones. And while King of Hellamp did give Zoro access to Conqueror's coding permanently, he's clearly already had this power while using the stronger 9-sword style technique against Kaido, which he denotes during the page as a passive use of the Conqueror's coding technique that even Zoro didn't understand how he could use, because this attack was his full power, holding absolutely nothing back, which we already saw was the same exact method by which he unlocked the King of Hellamp permanently, meaning that this Ashura, which is directly inferior to Paradise Totsuka based off of Kaido and Oda hammering it into our skulls that Oden can still cut him, it's clear that straight up strongest move to strongest move, Oden certainly wins. So will Zoro surpass Oden? Yes. In fact, he likely will someday very soon, but as of right now, with better mastery over his original blade, greater scaling from potentially being able to 1v1 Kaido, something Zoro could unfortunately never do, and of course, the more extravagant lore surrounding the legend of this Emperor battling powerhouse, and I hope you can see now, fully, why I can't give this fight to anyone else but Kozuki Oden. But hey, if you want to argue about it in the comments section with me, be my guest. I do always love hearing from you guys after all, and if you liked this video, be sure to do me the favor of subscribing. Your continued button clicking support is always much appreciated. That said though, feel free to watch the video on the card before you go, and that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.